To kick off this tutorial, we're going to create some C# scripts so we can get some interaction with the player and perhaps the basketball today. So let's go ahead and create a new folder if you haven't already for your scripts. So right click on Assets, Create Folder, type in Scripts. Alright, make sure you're creating your new scripts inside of the folder, so click on it here, right click in where it says you have an empty folder, create C# script. Alright, let's go ahead and call this player controller. Alright, go ahead and open it up for editing. Alright, so here's my new script. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of space it out a little bit. Alright, we actually don't need the start method, so you can go ahead and get that out of the way. Alright, so let's work on the movement for now. So we're going to have 4 key commands. You can either use ASDW or you can use the arrow keys, whatever you want. You can change the key codes when we get there. We're going to create 3 values. So we have a float, which is a decimal number, and it's going to be our strafe speed. If you don't know what strafe means, it just means to go left and right. So the speed is how fast we're going to do that. All right, I played around with it a little bit at first, so I pretty much know what values I want to use. You can play with it a little bit if you want to. We'll make them public. They don't have to be, but public allows us to manipulate them in the inspector in Unity. So float. We also have a forward speed. Helps if I spell public right. So we want a public float forward speed. Notice my naming convention. I'm using a lowercase letter to start with and a capital letter for every other word after that. It just makes it look nice in Unity. Equals, and mine's 0.4f. Again, you can change this if you'd like. And another float for our backward speed. If you want them all to go in the same speed in all directions, you really only need one variable, but I wanted to give it a little bit of difference in each way. Normally you can run faster forward than you can backwards, so that's why I did that. Alright, and our update function, this is going to be called every frame, and we're going to put in our 4 input commands. So we have if, we're grabbing the input class, then the get key method, and which key do we want to get? Well, we need to access all of the keys and then pick which one we want. So for me, I guess we'll do forward first. Doesn't really matter. W is going to be forward. Right, I'm going to use the WASD keys. And again, you can change these keys to whatever you want. So we're going to grab the transform component, and that's going to allow us to translate, meaning either move it in any 3 directions, either up, down, left, right, forward, and back. And since it is W, that's going to be forward for me. So we want a new vector 3. We're going to pick the translation. So X is left and right. We don't want to do any of that. Y is up and down. We definitely don't want to do any of that. So that's why those values are 0. And I want to move forward at my forward speed. Alright, which in this case it would be 0.4 units per frame, according to my variable that I set up here. Alright, and our 4 commands are pretty much going to look like this because they're just going to be modified a little bit. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it 3 times. Make sure it's all spaced out nice. Alright, and we're just going to modify this. So my first one's going to stay the same. That's my forward. And I guess I'll do backwards next. So I'll make that S. Again, I'm using the WASD keys. I'm going to translate it. So now I want to translate the same Z coordinate here. However, if I put in my backward speed, notice that the variables I set up here are all positive. So this would still move it forward 0.2 units. So we wanted to move it backwards. So we want it to be a negative value. To do that, all you got to do is put a negative sign in front of it. So this is going to make that 0.2 negative, and therefore it'll move backwards. So it's like he's backpedaling. Alright, so I got forward, backward, we need to do left and right. So my left is going to be A key. However, we don't want to use the Z coordinate, so I'm going to change that to 0. What we want to use is the X coordinate, because that'll move it to the left. So we want strafe speed. And changing the last statement, we want, or at least I'll use D, and again we want this to be 0F, and this is strafe speed. You guys see an issue with these two statements? Similar to what we did with forward and backward, notice one of them had to be negative. All right, if I'm using strafe speed, they're both going to go, in this case it would be to the right since our strafe speed is positive. So if I want to move to the left, I got to make it negative. All right, so your left movement and your backward movement should be negatives. Your forward and right should be positive, okay, depending on what key you used. All right, so that's what our script looks like. That should give us some movement. Go ahead and save that, come back into Unity, see if we have errors. We do not. However, we have not attached the script to the actual object. So if we click on our player, drag that script over here, and it'll add that script. All right, let's go ahead and apply the prefab. Right now we've changed what this object is. If we go to our prefab folder and click on the object, notice the script isn't there. All right, so by clicking on the object in the scene and clicking apply, that applies all the changes to the duplicate items that we could create. So if we go into our prefabs and click this now you'll see that the script is there. All right, go ahead and hit play. We can move around. Okay, maybe it's a little fast for you, maybe it's a little slow. Whatever you need to do, go ahead and change those values. All right, you will notice that we still cannot rotate the camera. It's going to be first person. If we rotate the mouse, it should rotate the camera. That's what we're going to do next. Alright, so I'll stop playtest, make sure I save my scene and my project. Alright, we're going to have to modify the movement in two different ways. We have the up and down camera movement and the left and right. The left and right needs to actually rotate the player itself. So the left and right rotation of the camera is actually going to be on the player controller script. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go back into that same player controller script. And we're going to go ahead and create one more public float, which is a decimal number once again, and it's going to be the sensitivity of how fast the camera rotates around. Again, I've played with these values before, so I pretty much know I'm going to use 15, but if you think that's too fast or too slow, you can change it. All right, let's actually put this new statement before the input commands, so it's going to be still inside of the update function, but it's going to be the very first line in that. So we're going to do, instead of transform translate, we want to do rotate. We're going to rotate the object. How do we want to rotate it? Well, we don't want to rotate it around the X, but we are going to get the input.getAxis, and we're basically going to get the X-axis of the mouse. Okay, where is the mouse pointing? That's going to rotate the object to the correct position. We're going to multiply it by the sensitivity, and therefore we can change how fast and how slow that the object is rotating. And again, we don't want to rotate the Z coordinate there. All right, so all we're basically doing is rotating around the Y-axis. Okay, remember this is the X, the Y, and the Z. And the Y-axis is the vertical axis, so we're rotating about that point. All right, kind of like a ballerina, if you want to think how they put their hands above their head in the center of their head. That's their Y-axis, and they're rotating. All right, little analogy there. All right. That should be enough to rotate the camera left and right. Let's see if that works. Don't have any errors. Playtest. Haha. We got left and right movement. Alright, last thing we need to do is figure out the up and down movement. For that one, the issue is, since if we open up our player in the hierarchy, we have the main camera attached. We actually want the camera to rotate up and down, but we don't want the player to rotate up and down. That's going to make him skew. And it's going to change our, if we actually go forward, for example, see if I can do it in the editor here. All right, if we actually rotate the actual player, it'll look like this, but then when we go forward, all right, notice the arrow here, he's going to be going into the ground. We don't want that to happen. We just want the camera to rotate. So let me undo that. All right, for example, here's our camera. We want the camera to rotate down and the player to stay. And you can see in the camera preview what's going on. That's what we want to happen. So that's why we have to put the script on the camera and not the player. All right, so I'll undo that. All right, you guys don't have to manipulate that. I just wanted to show you. All right, so we're going to need a new script. In the scripts folder, go ahead, create C# script, and let's call this camera controller, because it's the script that controls the camera. Pretty literal. All right, before we forget, let's go ahead and select your main camera and drag that on there, just so we have that script attached. All right, I'm going to click on the player and then apply the prefab. Alright, let's go ahead and open this camera controller script and let's bust this out. Alright, edit this so it's got the right format. Actually, we don't need the start method. You can get rid of that. There you go. We will need the update method. Alright, we're going to create 4 values. The first one's private. We're never going to need to edit it in the inspector. So this is going to be the Y rotation of the camera. Alright, the other ones let's make public, and they're going to be decimal values. Just like we have the sensitivity on X rotation, we need the sensitivity in the Y. I'm going to leave it at 15 like I did before. And then we have a minimum value that the player can look at. And this is going to be in degrees. We're going to use a decimal. And we also need a maximum. Alright, we shouldn't let the player be able to go all the way around. The head doesn't work that way. So that's what these limits are going to do. They're going to prevent the player from turning their head all the way around the body. Alright, so we got our 4 variables there. And we have 3 statements we need to do. Alright, first, we need to set the rotation variable that we set up in the script here. And we need to set that value. Well, we want to set it to the value of what the rotation of the camera actually is. Alright, so we're setting that up here. Sensitivity Y. There it is. Alright, so it's basically just getting the Y rotation of the camera and multiplying it by our sensitivity. That's why I spelled it wrong. There we go. Rotation Y equals mathf.clamp. So what this is going to do is actually prevent the camera from rotating too far. Again, making it look like the head's going all the way around the body. We want to clamp the rotation around, and now you'll notice this little box that popped up. We're going to clamp it between a minimum value and a maximum value. Well, that's what these were up here for. All right, we could have just taken these -60 and 60 and put them in right here, but then we couldn't change it in the inspector. All right, so I'm giving you that freedom there to be able to modify this game and put in the values you want. All right, makes it a lot more fun that way. All right. Maximum Y. There we go. All right, so we're clamping basically the camera so that you can't turn it all the way around. And the last statement we're going to make is to actually transform the camera. So this one's kind of tricky. Basically, all it's doing is grabbing the angle that we should move the camera, and again, it's part of the transform. Remember, a transform has position, rotation, and scale. This is actually setting the rotation of the camera. We're going to set it to a new value, so we need a vector 3, and we're going to set it to the negative rotation of the Y. We want to leave the Y value the same, and we don't want any rotation in the Z. Oops, forgot my prints. Alright, this should be enough to get our camera rotating in the Y direction. Alright, come back to Unity. Oop, looks like we got an error. Line 15. Whoops, transform is capitalized, shouldn't be capitalized. This means we're creating a new transform and then using this method that's attached to it. Don't want to do that. We want to use the actual transform of the object, so it's got to be a lowercase d. Alright, save that. Come back in. Haha, all fixed. Awesome. Alright, play test. We can move up and down. We can rotate left and right. Awesome. We can move around the court. Alright. That took a little bit longer than I thought it would, so we'll stop there. We'll create those 2 scripts, and I'll see you in the next tutorial where we'll create some more scripts and interact with the basketball.